horror movies are just about the scares and they're just like one set piece after another set piece of booze, but that's not really true. I think
Hi Pawan, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful already that I've met you, and I just can't wait, to start this conversation with you. Thank you so much, honestly. So, how's it going? Like, what are you working on right now?
currently I've just finished shooting a movie a couple of months ago. It's called Gaslight, which right now we're in post-production with.
Right.
So that's done. Writing Bhoot Police 2 and a bunch of other stuff as well. So those things are going on. So finally getting into production myself, forming a company with a friend of mine. So both of us are making movies together. But yeah, I think right now, so it's a good time, I guess. It's been a long time coming. So kind of glad that I'm getting to make the movies I want to make.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's the genre of Gaslight?
Gaslight's a psychological thriller.
Oh.
So very akin to like Phobia, how Phobia was.
Yeah.
So it's in that space, but yeah, it's a fun psychological thriller. It's got good elements of horror, of thrill, of mystery, and all that.
So, like, I've heard you speak about, how much you love these genres.
Wow.
And then you came into comedy.
Yes.
But yeah, one thing that you've always kept a constant is horror.
Yeah.
Right? Horror and thriller.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with adding comedy into it?
I guess it was just a natural progression. Like horror comedy was something that I've always wanted to explore, and it's been, with Bhoot Police, it's a really old story. This was when I first joined the industry in 2007-8, when I was an intern shooting like behind the scenes for movies. One of the first things I ever wrote was a small little like one line about Bhoot Police. There was but obviously back then I didn't have the ability to turn it into a script, or I didn't know anyone, and so it was just lying there. And so as time went by and other movies happened, and horror comedy has always been kind of like a passion of mine. Like the first movie that I actually wanted to make was which never got made. My first ever script that I wrote was a film called Shadi of the Dead, which was a kind of a zombie comedy, and I wrote this in 2008 when I was employed in Ad Labs. Around 2008, 2009, I wrote this script. It was a kind of a rom-com with the zombie kind of like Shaun of the Dead and all those movies that came. So I wrote that, and that was the first thing I wanted to make. But I guess people at that point in time didn't really fully understand the idea of horror and comedy. So they were like, how does this work? We're not sure. And then zombies was a very kind of a foreign concept to most people here, so they couldn't process it. So it never happened. But that script then got shelved by me, and then it was given to some other director, and then he made it. But midway, it just I think the movie was cursed. So it got stalled. So then that's from there came Ragini, because and then so on and so forth. So I've always wanted to do a horror comedy. It's always been something that I wanted to start my career with. So eventually, when the time was right, I've been always trying to make Bhoot Police. Even after Ragini, I tried to make Bhoot Police for a while, and I just couldn't make it, for some reason or the other. And so it just happened. So it's a natural progression. I think horror and comedy go hand in glove. They both are instant gratification genres. It's very difficult to balance it, to get that tone and to be able to consistently be able to kind of move out of comedy and get into horror seamlessly. It's a kind of tough thing, but it's thoroughly enjoyable if you like the genre and you can take a piss at it and have fun with it and enjoy. So I love comedy and horror. So it's something that I like doing.
Right. And you know, as soon as I walked over here, the first thing I saw was like, there's something that you relate to in everything that you have, like every piece that you have at your home.
Right.
And one thing that I noticed was you have a lot of souvenirs of Jaws.
Yes, I do. I have
Like,
a bunch of them.
so what is your story behind Jaws? Like, why do you love Jaws?
I just love Jaws. I even tattooed it on my hand. So it's the first movie I ever saw. Actually, I was 9, and I was in America with my family, and we were at Universal Studios, and they took me on this ride, which was the Jaws ride.
Right.
And it just petrified me. I saw the mechanical shark come out, and I was so petrified and amazed and enthralled. And then I snuck into they had these screenings. They would have these screenings of Jaws, and also Birds, Hitchcock's Birds. Universal would have it with, and it would like they would do a 3D rendition of it, so you could sneak in and you could watch a 3D version of Jaws. So but I was 9, and it was an adult film, but I managed to sneak in, and I saw Jaws, and it was I saw it on the big screen the first time in 3D, and it scared me shitless. Like, I was horrified by that movie, but I think my love for the genre began with that movie. I never went to the swimming pool again for a while, and I could never be in I couldn't even have a bath and tub. For as long as I could see the water, I was fine. The moment I couldn't see what was below the water, I was petrified. So it took me a while, but I loved it so much. It had such a strong effect. So I guess Jaws has been a movie that I keep going back to. And it's also a great film just to study, and as a film student, I think Jaws is it's quite incredible in terms of its editing pattern, its shot taking. There's so much to learn from that movie, and a lot of it, obviously, the great Spielberg has taken from Hitchcock, and so you see a lot of Hitchcockian kind of, telling of suspense, and which exists in Jaws, which I think was perfect.
Right, and like, I was just wondering, like, when you were talking about your love for Jaws, and your love towards how the filmmaking of that basically happened.
Right.
So how did you? Because I don't think during that time people were really introduced towards the idea of a director or direction as such. So how did you land yourself into it? Like, how did you find your love towards direction?
I guess my love was less for direction and more for the idea of making a movie, telling a story.
Right.
So I think I was always captivated by the idea of telling a film, telling a story. So I figured out that I started my career writing first, and I was to write, and I never in my wildest imagination thought that I could be a director, because I had no formal education. I didn't go to film school. I didn't do any of this. So I was just an intern at a movie company, at a production house, and I used to shoot their makings of, they used to take a DSLR and go and shoot the making of these movies. But I think the bug bit me in watching the work happening on set.
Right.
So I was there on a lot of these movies, I was there on Sujoy Ghosh's movie. I was there on a bunch of who's the guy who made Hera Fairy? Priyadarshan's movie. I was there on a bunch of other guys. So I was a bunch of all these movies, and I should watch the director and the actor and watch the cinematographer and watch the comics. So, because when you're making a movie, you're so close, because you're usually and they look through you, because you're just the making guy. You're just standing in a corner with the camera. So you land up hearing so much that you shouldn't be hearing, right? Like, the making guy is usually right next to you, and like 9 or 10 times when I'm directing on set or I'm venting, the next thing I turn on and see the making guy has got everything, So the making guy is all over, right? He's everywhere.
Yeah.
So he has that vantage point of actually hearing the process. So I was there and I was fascinated by it. So I think the bug bit me there, but I realized that I had no in on the industry because I was not from it. So I was just I thought maybe I'll write, and there were some opportunities that sprung up my way. People were looking for writers, so I just decided to take a chance and submit some of my writing, and then it got picked up, and via writing, I became a director.
Right. And you said that, so the first ever script, I feel like this is what everyone tells me, that their first script is like their baby. It's like their child,
Right.
And when you landed into directing Ragini,
Right.
how did you land into Ragini? Because you told us that your first script wasn't getting made the way you
Right,
wanted it,
right.
and it wasn't working out. So how did you land into Ragini? How did that happen?
So I guess I was making, I wrote Shadi of the Dead, which was this zombie comedy.
Right.
I was very keen on making it, but it was 2009 and no one knew anything about comedy horror or zombies, and the budget back then, I remember, was about 11-12 crore, which was very high, and I was a nobody, and I had no formal work in filmmaking. So, but I was lucky that there was Mr. Shekhar Kapoor was in the board of directors in that company, and he happened to see that I used to sit in a cabin with my fellow writer, and we would write all day, and he would keep coming in saying, what are these young kids doing? And he asked me once, what have you written? And I said, I wrote this zombie comedy, and it's called Shadi the Dead. And he was kind of, he chuckled at the one line. He says, give me the script. And he went away, and he said, I'll read it, but I never thought much of it. So he came back a couple of days later saying, I loved it. It's a really cool film, and you should definitely make this movie. And he told the producers that, the kids got a good film. And so just by default, because of Shekhar's approval or of the script, they thought that it had merit. So when it came to choosing a director, and no one wanted to touch it because they thought it was too alien for an Indian audience, again it was him that said that he wrote the film, so he knows it better than anyone else. Just give the kid a chance, let him shoot a scene or so, and I think he can do it. So I kind of got the tag as a director because of him and because of that script, but then recession hit and the movie could not be funded by the company, so it was shut down. But I still had the tag as a director because of that, by default. So they asked me that, hey, we still want you to make something for us, but can you make something at a very, 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 very low budget? Like, we'll give you like 1 crore to make a movie. Can you do it? And if you can, come back to us with an idea. So I think Ragini came from the other way around. It came from the aspect of saying, hey, I had a big movie that I wanted to make. I couldn't make it. Obviously, I was depressed, but I still have an opportunity. I still have a foot in the door. It's not the ideal opportunity, but it's an opportunity nonetheless. So it's a really small movie. So I already knew the sandbox that I was allowed to play in. It was 1 CR, so I knew clearly I had to write a movie in one house. Clearly I had to make a movie with barely any massive kind of VFX or cast or nothing hectic. So I think Ragini was born from the sheer kind of restrictions that were given to me, and I think around that time there was this entire found footage kind of mania in the West, with a lot of movies were on the rise, Paranormal Activity and a bunch of them. So I kind of said, hey, okay, those guys are doing it. Let's take the found footage genre. It's cheap. We can do it with a bunch of cameras, like literally these cameras. We took 7 of them, and we decided to come up with a story in a house, and that's how Ragini was born, really.
Okay, so like you said that you wanted the cinematography of Ragini to be like how it is in Paranormal Activity and everything. But then, while you're showing us that side of it, you still want it to be a little cinematic, right? You want to show the cinematic elements of it while keeping it authentic, to the concept of it. So how did you manage to do both of them?
Well, I guess that's the thing about like Ragini was that we were going with the idea that there were these cameras that were locked in the house, that were hidden in a house. There was this hidden camera narrative where almost like akin to Big Boss. So there were like 8-10 cameras that this sleazy boyfriend had put up everywhere in the house, that he was going to record his girlfriend and this outing that he had with his girlfriend, and she didn't know this. So I mean, I was never going for, we spent a lot of time choosing those angles, but we really wanted to make it look raw and believe and real. But obviously as the movie progressed, there was a lot of interference, because we had at that point in time, Balaji had come in, and they also had their little
Right.
say in terms of what the movie should look like and how it
Yeah.
should be. And left to me, I would have made a really raw home video, because I was
Right.
more keen on telling a gritty kind of realistic horror movie. I mean, again, there was lots of psychological aspects to it, which I think eventually didn't make it to the final print, but we let it go on the editable.
Right.
Yeah,
And so I feel like horror as a genre,
yeah,
I really don't know how the writing process of it works, because horror is a movie where it has a lot of effects that actually makes a horror movie, where it's sound, where it's light, where it's
Right.
the editing,
Right.
which basically makes a horror movie that interesting. So what is the writing process of a horror movie?
I guess it's like any other film, to be honest. There's no difference to. When people say that horror movies are just another set piece of booze, but that's not really true. I think a good horror movie, primarily starts with the story, in terms of what are you saying, why do you want to tell the story, what are the themes, who are these characters, which I think is universal to any story, any genre. The good ones that actually stand the test of time are ones that have something to say beyond just scaring you. Because I look at horror, like horror is you can replace the same horror set piece with like an action set piece.
Right.
And so the genre is, I think, largely, if you look at it purely as a packaging purpose, that's it. It's only packaging really at the end of the day. The core meat is a story that you want to tell about, like two brothers dealing with and having an ideological clash, and them going through a journey of finding out who they are, is the core story of Bhoot Police. Everything else around it is the packaging of it. Like, with Phobia, was the girl dealing with post-traumatic, we're dealing with trauma from the abuse that she went through, and then how she copes with that abuse is the core idea of the film.
Right.
Everything else is then you bring in the elements of the genre that you are doing. So I guess, and I guess all of the and any good horror set piece or horror scene, if it's not really doing much for the story, and if it's just there and the movie stops, then it just becomes like an item song. It's just like it's pointless after a point. It's so yeah, I think horror writing is very difficult, because at least for me, I'm always looking to figure out what to tell with this film, and
Right.
I think one of the things that people forget about horror movies, because I don't think we give due justice to horror films here in this
Right.
country.
Right.
But I think more than anything else, horror movies are a window to explore kind of topical, relevant, darker issues about
Right.
society, about human psychology, about relationships, about things that we otherwise, if you were to make a movie about trauma of someone being abused, could be a very boring drama movie.
Right.
But then if I mask it up as a horror psychological thriller, then it's entertaining.
Right.
So I guess some of the great movies have very strong subtext, and I think
Right.
so. It's actually a very harrowing process writing a horror movie. It's not easy.
Right. And so this is when it comes to writing, but when it comes to a technical aspect,
Yeah.
in terms of lights or sound or editing, like what is that one thing that you always struggle with, while making a horror movie?
I guess you struggle with first. I think the first and foremost thing is to figure out what kind of tone are you going for in the movie,
Right.
in terms of what is it that you really are, like the different kinds of horror movies. Like you're making a Conjuring, then there's a different kind of tone that you're setting, and trying to stay true to that tone right through from the beginning, from the inception all the way to finally get into the editable. Because a lot of horror is building that mood.
Right.
And one of the things I personally like the genre is because there are very few genres where I believe that, like, there's a reason why I like horror or any of these genre movies, because I think it really juices the visual audio medium to its
Right.
fullest.
Right.
Right? like a comedy is just like, hey, one frontal and like two OSs and one master, and it's just about dialogue buzzy, you know.
Yeah.
And it's about the actor acting, nothing more really.
Yeah.
But with a horror movie, it's about the mise en scène, it's about the staging, it's about how the character moves across the room, and so a lot of that is actually where I think the fun of filmmaking comes into play, because you really have to really visualize your sequence and your movie in your head. So that's why I like horror. I think it's only because of that. But I mean, I go about it purely by, again, I let the story command the kind of tone that it needs, you know.
Right.
And then I try and set that, and then me and my DOP, we spend like a lot of hours going back and forth, discussing the tone, and we spend like endless hours going through. We do a short division and we see maybe this could work, but then maybe throw it out of the window, and then we see, okay, are there any references of movies that we really
Right.
liked that I thought of, or the certain music that I think this really works for me. So we really tap into music, movies, and also a large part of our referencing for finding a tone or palette is in paintings.
Right.
So we really kind of sit down and look at paintings as an understanding of how to frame and how to light, and seeing which artists can we actually base our visual palette on.
Right.
So there's a kind of a process there that we go through, but yeah.
And as you said that, you know, that we don't have an audience for horror movies.
No.
So
Well,
does
it's
that,
a growing audience.
it
now, I
is,
think.
yeah, it is. But I feel like still, if you talk about Hindi horror movies, I still feel like, you know, we have a very niche crowd for that, like extremely niche just for that. So do you think that affects your filmmaking in any way, or do you think that affects your film in any ways?
It does, surely does. I mean, it took me a long time to make Bhoot Police. It took me a long time to actually. I've been working in the industry since 2011, and now in 22, so it's been about 10 years. Because I've stuck by the genre for so long and not really explored other spaces, it's been tough. There've been years in between where I was just jobless, and I'd like in between movies, like, you know, where's the next movie coming from? What do I do? You know, what do I fall back on? So a lot of it, like, you know, and people have obviously tried to come in and say, hey, listen, you should try comedy, you should do one of those
Yeah.
movies, you should do this, you should do that. You know, you don't have to be so rigid about the kind of movies you want to make, you know. And I almost fell victim to that, but then I was like, I mean, there's a certain kind of, I do see a void in this market of horror filmmaking that's not there in this country.
Right.
And I feel like there are very few pioneers who actually are able to take it. Ramu did some good stuff back in the day, and there's been really no one after that. I mean, I don't count Vikram Bhatt and all as horror filmmakers, they're quite dodge, but you know, I'm sure there's an audience for it, but not for me.
Right.
So that was not my audience. I was saying, this is not the horror that I want to see in my country.
Right.
So let me try and go and make something that I want to see.
Right.
So there was a kind of a process there that I kind of went into. But yeah, it's been tough. I mean, now, I think in the last 4 years, things have changed.
Yeah.
I think the OTT platforms have come in, the access to the need for more content and more slightly
Right.
niche content and stuff like that. There's now a larger audience. And the fact that some of these big horror comedies did really well, X3
Yeah.
opened up the floodgates for horror
Right.
comedy. So that changed the game.
Right.
And so yeah, and people are waking up to the fact that this is a genre. The good thing about a horror movie, and I keep saying it, is that it's one of the few genres that is a communal experience. Like,
Right.
if you watch a horror movie alone in your house, it's not very satisfying, you know, because, you know, if you would watch that same horror movie with a group of friends,
Right.
the enjoyment factor increases like 10 times higher, because you feed off each other's energies. And then
Right.
and then if you're in a dark room with a bunch of strangers watching this movie, there's a communal experience of people reacting to fear
Right.
and getting scared, and then you're feeding off someone's nervous laughter, and you're feeding off someone's like gasping, and then there's that thing that brings them together in that dark room that very few movies do. And I've been in the hall in some movies, in some horror movies, and it's just like there's like a palpable like
Yeah.
air of like tension and nervousness in the air, which is
Right.
great fun. And to see them all scream together or laugh together is actually really exciting. So I just feel like that communal factor
Yeah.
is very few genres have that. Comedy has it, and horror has it.
Right.
But you can still watch comedy alone and laugh at it in by yourself. But
Yeah.
so I just feel like I
So
think
you're sticking to horror now.
especially now. I mean, I'm doing a couple of stuff that's also outside of horror because I do like comedy. It's a genre that I really appreciate and I've always enjoyed. And so I'm actually also dabbling in a little bit of comedy. But most of it is horror.
Right.
In that horror has many subgenres. So it's
Right.
horror comedy, psychological thrillers.
Yeah. Right.
Real horror and like a bunch of them.
Right. And so when you made Bhoot Police,
Right.
how do you differentiate that which movie, like it has a massive cast, it's a massive movie. How do you decide what movie is going to be an OTT movie or it's going to be a theatrical release? How do you decide that?
Technically, I think the pandemic decided that for us.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this time around, we actually set out to make Bhoot Police for the theater. We shot it with the kind of cinematic kind of quality. We were trying to give it that very large scale vibe, and our intentions were to make a theatrical film. But
Right.
unfortunately, the pandemic and whatever came with that really killed the box office industry. So we were just forced to go to OTT.
Right.
So, I mean, with today's culture, things get decided beforehand. Like they'll producers read a script and say, "Oh, this feels like an OTT movie." Like
Yeah.
which is I guess has its pros and cons.
Right.
There's very little risk that people take, but with OTT, there's the risk factor kind of is less. People take chances. So that's the pro. But the flip side is that these movies that could also be theatrical films and could create an audience and could find I mean, because you're not taking chances, you don't know what your audience wants really. You're just feeding them the kind of the obvious cookie cutter kind of movies that they're used to. So I feel like that's the flip side to it a little bit. But like this movie that I did right now, Gaslight, I mean, because just purely by the idea that it's a psychological thriller and it's a female lead, automatically people think it's an OTT movie and not a theatrical, because they think that female-led films don't work so well in theatrical business right now. I mean, no one's working right now, so it doesn't really matter whether you're male or female. Everything is tanking, but and no one really knows anything right now. Everyone's talking through their ass. And so it's just like, but I guess the pro is you just at least you get to make more movies. And for me, I think that's my takeaway. As long as I get to make more movies, it's fine, because the more you make, the more you learn, and the more you learn, the more better you get at your craft, and that's the process really.
And if you could describe your worst experience of your life that basically changed your life.
In movies?
In a good way, it changed.
In
but
movies
it's a
or
worst
outside of
experience.
movies? Like,
No, like
generally in life?
I mean, it could be anyways. Maybe it could be professionally.
Yeah. I mean, one of the worst things, I mean, I felt very ill when I was 23. And I think that illness was a much needed like speed breaker and halt in my life, because my life was going down a certain road that would have eventually led to just me being kind of completely wasted.
Right.
So that illness at that point in time was heartbreaking. I thought, oh my God, now I'm 23, my life's over. But it made me kind of pause and reflect and see that the choices that I've made till now were not good, right? and that I have my full life ahead of me, and what do I want to do with myself. And I was at home for a couple of months because of the illness. I was quarantined and locked in, and I couldn't move. So I had a lot of time to introspect and figure out what went wrong.
Yeah.
And one of the things I had to pass time was that I had a TV in front of me, and back then I had like a DVD player, and so I used to watch 4 movies a day, and I pretty much wiped out two DVD libraries in the neighborhood. Like I saw all their movies. So when I came out of my illness and I kind of recovered from the illness 2 months after that, I had probably seen, over 1,000 movies, and I was so aware of movies and the genres and everything. I felt so kind of alive thing that in some way movies saved me, and they found me at my lowest point, and I think I came out of that saying, hey, I want to try my hand in movies, and that became my journey at getting into movies. So that was, I think, the turning point for me.
That's amazing, and I feel like there's a turning point in everyone's life. That basically gets them through that right path that they want to go through.
Yeah.
If I asked you today, like if you're given 100 crore budget today, what would be your ideal project?
Ideal project? I don't know. I mean, I would. I don't know what I would. I would always wanting to make a monster movie. To be honest, it's like Jaws. It's always been in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something like that. And if I had the money and I had the freedom to do that, I would make a pretty big budget monster movie.
But I feel like, for some reason, just the title is really stuck in my head. Shaadi of the Dead. Like I honestly, when you said zombies and all of that, and I just can't get it out of my head right now, and I'm just thinking, what if it came out, what would it be? Like literally, I just can't. I don't know why, but I would honestly, personally, we can clip it out, but I would really tell you to make that because I would genuinely watch it.
Yeah, but it's stuck with someone now, unfortunately.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Honestly, it was so much fun, and I think everyone's just gonna enjoy this entire podcast that has come out, and it's just going to help everyone so much. It did help me, so I'm going crazy and nuts knowing how much it's going to help everyone else. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much.
All right, anytime. Thank you.